right, welcome to Shop Talks, which is a production of the Ink Kitchen. You can check our materials out at inkkitchen.com. When the next video goes up, by the way, we have a YouTube channel. I urge you to subscribe. It will be the 200th video. All kinds of information, everything from reminiscing and history like this to basics on how to make a screen and stop dye migration. Check that out. And we're brought here by the graces of Impressions Expo and these great sponsors on both sides here. Check them out. And I'm here with my friends to talk about the history of screen printing machines. So, and the way we're going to work is we're going to talk about it a little bit. Rick Fuqua has generously made a little slideshow with some pictures of ancient history when dinosaurs ruled the earth, etc. And we will, the genesis of this is that I watched a video of an old, huge screen printing place, Winterland, and I saw in the background some old machines, and I wanted to write about it, and there was actually no information you could Google about a precision oval, or I was looking for, or a Centurion. And, you know, they're still sold and still used, and yet they're kind of erased from the collective memory. So I thought this is kind of an initial foray into capturing some of that information before it disappears. Because, in fact, everything is not on the internet. I also want to point out that we have these posters in the place between the arena and the main hall. You can buy those, and it goes to a really good cause that I checked out here in Long Beach, homeless program called Care Closet. So think about that. All right, so I have Rick Fuqua from, what's the name of your company? Real Performance Machinery. James is from Hicks Corporation. He was, then he wasn't, now he was again. And then Tom Kadut, who is the owner of SPSI from Minnesota. They sell equipment. He's been in the industry for a long time as well. And I think we'll have the two of you add in, but let's go through your slideshow a little bit, Rick.
So first I'd like to say that there's a lot of machines that have been made all over the world, and our focus here is mainly what has been introduced into the U.S. and the years that it came in and the influence that it had over future machines. So I'm not going to mention or have a slide on every machine, although I probably do have it. It's just relevant, in my opinion, to machines that have been sold quite a few of. So the first known machine is pictured in this old advanced catalog. And I believe that is, 86, 89, 69. And the first machine was a inline press. And there's some controversy as to whether or not Allison Manufacturing made the first one or Precision, but Precision did manufacture this machine. And what you're seeing, it was actually offered through an Advanced catalog, which, as many of you may know, Advanced became a predominant machine manufacturer themselves over a period of time. But this machine had no frills whatsoever. The biggest problem with running an inline was that the shirts didn't return back to you. So as you can imagine, trying to set up a machine, you'd have a lot of scrap shirts that you would need to use to do so. There's not a lot to talk about in that it doesn't have many features.
Actually, point that out, because you know, when I first saw one, I was like, whoa, you can't, like, so all the squeegee speed was the same, all the screens went down at the same time, et cetera, right?
Right, so there's no true independent heads on this machine. Everything works off of one bar. So your squeegee and flood bar are all mounted together so they would travel at the same speed. And the early ones, I don't believe there was any squeegee pressure adjustment either. It was one whole pressure adjustment.
And then to change platens was easy. It only took like 4 or 5 hours probably, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, you'd make the trap outline black so it would cover all the misregistration.
Oh, yeah, the registration was an issue. This is just another picture of a larger one of those.
Someone said, don't forget the hammer. The fine registration really was, in the early presses, until they got more advanced, you would see a hammer on just about anyone's press.
Unfortunately, we still see some. This is a catalog in '76, and you can see on the cover of it that we have a round machine there, and in the middle on the right side. Yeah, I'm looking for something here. This precision, I thought it was kind of entertaining because the very top is saying that they have micro registration system. That was a big deal at the time. As everyone's pointing out, most people were using hammers up until that time.
Did it work?
Sorry?
Did it work?
Sort of. This is an electric version of the hydraulic, but just going back to the basic hydraulic oval, which I don't have a picture of, is a lot of machines were sold with that format. And the earlier machines were still using a single bar for everything that flooded and printed at the same time.
And what was the drive? What kind of drive did they have?
It was a hydraulic system and a big RAM that would index it. And there was no ability to go backwards in registration.
And originally there was no way to flash in between color until you guys started mounting them on the back. The back sides where they would load and unload, and they were flashing colors.
Flashing was difficult, and eventually they made a system that would fit in the head. But the problem was that you had to make sure the head was up and out of the way because there wasn't any convenient way of removing the flash independently. This is an Aero multi-printer. Somehow I've got a slide missing. There's a picture up here of the early version of that. That was the first round machine. It was made in the late 60s, and it was called a Cameo multi-printer. And the reason, we have someone here shaking their head, they may have had one. So the Cameo multi-printer was interesting in that it was really a graphics press that Advance called the Cameo. And the Cameo was placed around in a round indexer, and that was, to my knowledge, the first round t-shirt machine that was out there. The problem with that machine, the predominant problem was that when using a graphics press head, it didn't have enough head weight. So printing thicker plastisols, and many of you that are younger wouldn't know about thick plastisol. That was a real problem in the beginning days of screen printing. And the head just wouldn't push the ink through.
We actually made our own press with a fill bar, which had the same graphic problem, and we literally had lead weights that we piled on top of the head to hold it down. That was the control of squeegee pressure, how many lead weights we had on top. Boy, that was fun days, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of people that hung bricks and so forth.
So let me ask you, Rick, you might know, are there still Aero multi-printers out there in operation?
Yes.
They were built like a tank, yeah?
Yeah. The registration on the machine could be very accurate, but it did need to be recalibrated semi-annually probably. But it had independent print heads, which was a big improvement over what we had up until that point. And by that I mean you had adjustment for speed. You had a micro for each print head, but one head could print 2 times while one other head was printing once. And that was unique to a lot of the round machines because they operated off an up and down mechanism. But this machine had the front bar on it, I think, weighed about 20 pounds. So that was enough weight to push most thick white inks through. This is a jump into the next phase after the hydraulic oval. And the hydraulic oval had a lot of it lacked a lot of features, but with the Versa oval, this was the first time the Precision went with a true independent print head. And with the true independent print head, they had all the adjustments that the multi-printer had. One of the things that I didn't like about the machine was that you couldn't get the screen out easily. You had to use a pin register system in order to be able to pull it out, wipe the bottom of the screen, and push it back in. Some people would fashion a piece of conduit with a rag on the end of it and sneak it underneath the screen because the screen wouldn't come up very high. And that was a serious limitation, but otherwise it printed large format. And a little bit before this, they introduced another cam follower bearing in the rear because the machines up until that point just had one cam follower in the front, and you were dependent on the chain to provide accurate registration. And over time, the chain would enlarge and the registration would go out the window.
So were all the presses you showed so far chain driven?
No, the multi-printer had a gearbox. Yeah, the round machines so far all had gearboxes that they drove. All the hydraulic ovals had chains. But the problem with a chain is a lot of people think they stretch. Well, they don't really stretch. It's the pins that go in between each link. They start to wear a hole bigger than what they are starting out. So that makes the chain go longer, and when it does, it'll move around on you. So by this time, Precision started to add a rear cam follower bearing and a keyway to trap it. And at that point, they were more competitive with those people that were trying to do something a lot more detailed.
These machines were pretty fast, as I recall. They weren't slow, right?
They're pretty quick. But they did a good job of big printing. And the picture that you're looking at right here has a feature that they came up with that was called a flip pallet. And what you could do with that is you could print. Sometimes people would use one side of the press to print one side. You would lift the pallet up, flip it around, lay it back down, and that way you could get a full wrap around the shirt. And the only part that didn't print was the thickness of the pallet, which the pallet was made up of two pieces. It had a base pallet, and then the top pallet the T-shirt was placed around. So that was pretty thin, probably about 3/32. So it looked like a total wrap. This is a toss machine. We got some guys here with MHM, and they can correct me on this, but I recall this being the first air machine that was round that was introduced into the United States.
I think Regional Supply or one of those guys.
Western Supply.
Western Supply, yeah.
Yeah. I have that coming in at
That was
the
designed
70s.
Designed by Otto Eppinger, yeah, at the time.
Yeah. Otto was the owner and the engineer, and he was active in the screen print industry. He was here for most of the shows after they came into the U.S.
Were they made in Australia?
They were made in Australia.
So he was a German, but he made them in Australia. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
People used to mistake that, yeah.
And a little bit
Not
of
Austria, Australia.
Little trivia on that shop. That's where I met Peter Walsh when Peter worked at TAS in Australia.
Yes.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, now he's at.
These were, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, these were pretty good when they were small, and then they tried to make them big, and they didn't work so great, right?
They didn't
You
make
can't
it-
really make a race car out of a Volkswagen, kind of, right?
What I credit the TOS people for was they had a pretty interesting electromechanical drive. It was still air, or air over oil with the hydraulic shock, but it was a pretty good system. The things that came out after that were not quite as well engineered, in my opinion. They also had a bigger 8-color, and then we're in the age of the M&R Challenger, and the first M&R Challenger was in '86, and that company was started by a couple guys that worked at Advance. So they wanted to make a round machine, but they wanted to make something that was less money. And this machine really took off because it was a lot cheaper to purchase than any of the other machines that were popular at the time. At that point in time, really the two machines that sold the most in the U.S. was the multi-printer and the Precision Oval. With the Challenger, the first machines that they came out with were pretty inconsistent, and that when you're dealing with air, the indexing system would rely on a shock absorber that would catch the machine and slow it down and stop it. And it had to be stopped really well before it could go up and into the registration forks. And just temperature changes and humidity changes and the air changes, and as a result, a lot of those machines at a show were running smoothly, but in practicality, most of them were running pretty rough. And the squeegees that they used for the squeegee pressure and flood bar pressure, they were lacking in size. They were very small. Later on, they increased them to about 1.5 inches diameter, but the small ones made you basically print with coarser meshes in order to get a print. And a lot of people that started with them didn't realize it, but when you have head pressure, you can print a lot more detail because you can go up on your mesh counts. So it's not impossible to print through 355. These machines were typically bolted to the floor for good reason. And
Or they would go out the door on their own, right?
yes. And that was, again, related to the indexing. And the small squeegees were really difficult to get enough squeegee pressure with. And there was a lot of trade-offs, but the price was right, and there was a lot of people that purchased these machines.
And this was like mechanical registration, correct?
Yeah.
So like forks, and that's the only thing that registered it, right? So you needed a lot of adjustments over time as it banged its way
Well,
along, right?
And the print heads would, the pallets would deflect a lot because you didn't have a really good support arm on those machines. So when you started your print, when the squeegee would come down on the pallet, it would bow 1/2 inch. But it was just
It's cheap.
Serendipity would be that it would print and register, though, because all the screens were bending 1/2 inch. Now, these guys can speak to this. This is the first MHM machine that came into the USA, and it was called the SA machine.
Yep, that was 1985. The first machine came into the U.S. Actually, 1980 is when MHM made their first machine, old round machine. And
Some of these are still running, is that
they
right?
are, yeah,
Which
absolutely.
is crazy. So they're
Yeah.
how many? I can do the math.
35, yeah, 30. I think 35, right, Flo? 35 years, still running. MHM is still supporting them. Yeah, built unbelievable. So
These machines were air operated. The carriage, the squeegee flood bar carriage, would cycle with air. So this is in the kind of the similar genre of the M&R machine. The primary difference on the printhead was that at that time they used a V squeegee flood bar.
yep,
And that limited, in my opinion, the amount of sales that they made because everybody was used to having a separate flood bar and squeegee.
I'm glad you said used to it, because I remember when we were printing, we had MHMs and it had the V squeegee and V flood bar, and Brian, who's back there, was there. We were in Lyon, France, and we had like a crowd of like 400 people. What? You can't be printing plastisol with this machine? It's for water base only. And in fact, we were printing, fine art prints with a V squeegee. I don't know, I don't know, I think I saw a picture of somebody having that now. It's not a terrible idea to have a squeegee instead of a metal flood bar.
Yeah,
but
what he's talking about
eventually
is
you
a
had
chopper.
to, people were just used to it, like you said.
Yeah.
And I got something to throw about this. Early on, it was usually manual printers, like at Gear for Sports, for instance. They had the Hicks manual printers. We had 6 or 7. They ended up having 30 of them because they could set up the small jobs for 50, 60 run on a manual quicker than they could on an automatic until this machine showed up, and they could set this up as fast as a manual printer. And that's I got a real lesson early on in the 80s about that when the SAs, and Tom at a couple of your shops as
Yeah.
well.
yeah. The other thing too is the way these screens locked in. It's a bar system, and so yeah, they had really good the way they held the screens and with the V squeegee.
So it held it in like this with pins
Yep.
versus the old ways clamping, which are like manual presses, where you do that little dance where you register it and clamp it and it moves and you swear, and then you unclamp it and clamp it again. And that's still one of the main features of their presses probably is that pin system like that, right?
Yeah, one of the things I didn't like about the SA machine was that it had 2 bars underneath the screen to hold the screen into place. And if for any reason the top deck came down, not lined up with the pallet, you bent all your pallets. And that wasn't likely, but it's happened. I've been to customers that had that happen.
And Rick, if you remember early on at Hicks, we were putting those little pins in for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you'd send us a bunch of frames, and we put in the little registration pieces because we had the equipment. You made it for Tom too.
So they were basically one of the first companies that sort of forced you into a pin register system. And if you bought into that, then it was more of a system as opposed to an add-on. And one other thing to point out, that was the first machine I'm aware of where the top deck of the press lifted rather than the pallets going up and down.
Which has a great thing of it. Gravity puts it in the right place instead of air and mechanical things that need realigning. So that, gravity's kind of always there.
Yeah.
Until we start printing on the moon, I guess. All right.
Okay. This is the American Centurion. And this came out as a way to compete with M&R's selling feature where they had this free will ability to cycle the machine by hand rather than automatically if you were wanting to move the pallet from one position to the other. And it had the heads turned around, so the multi-printer pivoted from the outside. Some people thought that was bad, but I liked that in the sense that I could see all the shirts printing at the same time. So if you had anything that was lightly tacked and the shirt was lifted up with the mesh, you could actually visually see that. That was the only machine we could really see everything that was going on with the multi-printer. And since then, everything is like running a RC car around a building. You see it for a little while, and otherwise you have to just wait for it to come around. But this machine had a key feature that you see today a lot machines have, which is a high lift feature, where the print heads would pop up from the back, leaving the access to the screen for you to clean the bottom of the screen. And it had a 2-track system, which makes it ideal for wide printing. So later on, this machine was adapted to do all-over printing, and it did that really well.
It's kind of interesting how features that were so essential are not as essential. So back when this would have been made, the inks still built up a lot on the back of the screens. They hadn't really fixed the formulations for that. So a feature where you could get and clean the back of the screen was easily and fast was super important, even more than it would be today, right?
A couple of the other features, though, were that you had headstands, and most of the machines today don't. But there was a period of time that the ones that didn't have headstands had a lot of flexing, and that was the advantage of the headstand, is that you would basically have virtually no bending of the pallet out there on the end.
And these are still in operation for sure, right? I think I saw one for sale from your company. Yeah?
Yeah, they're still out there.
Yeah, one thing that you're mentioning, Rick, is the build-up on the backs of the screens. I mean, on today's presses, we can get, we've got higher tension screens, we get less build-up, and of course, soft-hand additives in the inks now are how we combat the build-up. But back then, everything was just mashed down, and we had to really, build-up was an issue.
I just threw this up here. This is the all-over pallet system that went with the Centurion, and that during my tenure there, that was a big deal. We sold a lot of machines based on the ability to print in register all over the whole shirt.
I think Liquid Blue still ran those. That was their print there. They were still running those presses till only a few years ago.
Yeah. This is a transition for M&R. I guess that's why I just threw it up here, is that when M&R had an answer for the all-over pallet, they came up with their own design, and they needed to be able to index a single-ply all-over pallet that was 3/8 inch thick. It was very heavy, and as a result, their air drives weren't prepared to handle it, and they basically wouldn't work. So they switched to a servo drive indexer. And that was kind of the beginning of their transition to completely electric machines for the most part. This was a machine that was not terribly successful, but it was an all-electric version with the servo drive. It also had a belt that wrapped around the main hub, which was basically a copy of the MHM, the Synchro Print 2000. This is another picture of a toss machine. This is later in the 90s, where they also came up with an electric head. And this is an old copy of mine. I have to throw it up here because I think still to this day it had more electronic features on it than any machine out there today.
You could set the automatic peel on that machine.
Yeah,
I remember
we had
the snap off on the screen, and
we had 4 stepper motors, one in each corner of each frame. You could program them to lift as high as you want. You could program the 2 front ones to lift at a faster rate than the ones in the rear. So you could basically duplicate what happens with the clamshell graphics press. So when a clamshell raises up, it basically peels the mesh away from the print. And when you don't have that and you have a machine that just goes straight up and down, you've got to build enough off contact into the print that it'll release, so it doesn't release as you're indexing. It had a lot of features. I don't know if I got, whoops.
It also had the, I just remember there was a lot of information, partly because you couldn't get inside it to see what the hell was going on, that you had a lot of data sort of that was
You
on
could
the
save,
outside.
you could save a job. The go-to feature that a lot of people are using as a brand new thing that they're advertising, that had that on there. This was in the mid-90s. If you wanted to go from station 1 to station 8, you would just hit that and go-to button and hold it till it got there, or it would automatically go to that station.
how many colors was that one? Did you went up to?
We made it was the first modular oval also, and as a result, we built them. I know that some of them were over 50 feet long, with heads
Yeah.
on both sides.
And
Probably the other feature on that machine that revolutionized the oval was the registration system that we had on it. When you build a modular oval and you're adding more length to it, you're having more problems with chain stretch, and the fact that the pallet, when you stop it, it's not going to stop in exactly the right spot. So what we did there is we basically made the arm on the machine separate from the pallet and the pallet plate, and then the plate would move into a set of locators independent of the arm. The precision system for many years relied on resilient bushings, is what their patent called for. And a resilient bushing is just a hard rubber piece that goes over the pins on a chain. And they were expecting that to go where they wanted it to when they put the locator into it. And those things get hard over a while and they just don't work.
I thought it was called an Alexon. Was the company Infinity and the certain presses an Alexon?
What's that?
That one?
That was called an Infinity, yeah.
Not Alexon. That was something
No,
else?
Lexon was the name of the company.
Oh, okay.
So this is a 3000, and this came out in about 2000, right around 98, 2000. And the thing that this machine had was it had, I think it's the first one that ever had a go-to button, where you could hit the go-to, you could save a job, and you could call it back, and the screens would go right back in the same area, same position. So if you saved jobs, which was big back then, you could go back to job 100, hit the go-to, screens would go back in the same position, and they automatically would move. It had stepper motors, and this was a big game changer.
Yeah.
This was a big game changer, especially to the bigger shops. The runs were actually starting to get shorter back here too, and then they multiple setups. So this is really what got MHM on the map with this particular press.
And one thing that impressed me with this one, if you wanted your image placement to come down, you didn't necessarily even have to move your shirt up and down. They could press a button and all the screens would come back in register down. That's amazing. They showed us that at a trade show once, and one guy didn't believe that they just moved all the screens at one time by so many inches. He said, no, what did you even do? So he printed it twice for us so you could see the first one and the other one behind it. Just very impressive.
And then, Rick, you would know better than. So This was the first press that I saw where really electronically it went into place, and almost the mechanical registration was almost like just to make sure, if you will. It was a final thing, whereas it wasn't banging into place with mechanical registration. You know what I mean? It rotated to its place.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the first one, but this
Well, with
first I saw.
With the right servo drive system, you don't really need forks and bearings like everybody uses. The problem with that is that it's very expensive.
Right.
So in order to make presses more affordable, typically an outside registration.
It was also, I don't know if other presses were bolted together, but this was welded, as, the arms, etc. So it didn't need the, there was a first good
Supports.
press
No-
I saw, it didn't
no
need supports
supports.
on the outside.
No.
And then we had the first one in the United States, and it ran every day every day for
Yeah.
20-something years.
Yeah.
Like we'd have a head problem or something, but the machine ran. It was like very seriously built, like you said, not kind of throwaway, didn't need to be rebuilt over time or anything like that. More of an investment.
I think that's why
maybe
the-
like the older Centurions and stuff.
I think that's why the multi-printer was in the field for so long, is that when it would print, it was on a cam system, and it just went 100 or 360 degrees. So there wasn't any banging at the front or the back. And so the amount of prints you could get off of a print head was incredible. And this is my company. This is a machine with a lot of digital features as well. This press has got digital off contact with one button. It's got a memory for the stroke, where you can just move the carriage where you want it to start or stop and hit a button. It has a teach mode for basically that, and off contact, and the squeegee angle is digital. And you also have a digital pressure readout. So rather than a pneumatic gauge, you actually have a digital readout that tells you what your squeegee pressure is. And with all those features in that one head, you're able to really nail down what your print settings are, because there really isn't any settings that you don't have in some kind of digital feature. And it's unique in that it does all that, but there are other machines out there that have membrane switches that are just basically toggle switches. All they're really doing is turning something on and off, but they don't really give you that digital feedback. So the people that have bought that machine are typically people that are working with tighter tolerances and want a better quality print, more predictable, easier to train new people.
No hammers.
No,
I don't know, when you were showing the old M&R one, I remember people would call them the Rasta bars. They were the pieces of metal that you would put in with different colors for the different off contact.
Yeah.
Not exactly the same precision type
Yeah.
thing like that, huh?
Exactly. I threw this up here because I think this was a turning point in something that became a real popular thing. Is Riley Hopkins came out with a device, he called it the Speedway, and I'm looking to see at what year that was, but it was quite a long time ago. And what it did was it would automatically place your screen in the correct position. And this later on, about 10 years later, became the Trilock that M&R patented. And I think a lot of people enjoy the Trilock now that we've come up with the digital direct-to-screen devices, because the limitation on the pen register systems were really the developing the films to where you had them punched and had them on a carrier sheet, and then put the carrier sheet on a pen bar, and then there was lots of steps, and with each generation there was an error, so you could be off a little bit.
You're only as good as how your artist in the layout room, how well they could strip up the sheets. They had to get it perfect in registration in the art room before you burned your screen. So there was still, micro was still needed though. Just slightly.
Right, and that's I remember that MHM has the pins, and they used to have a basically upside down unit called the film positioning, little lights to line up the registration mark, and it was pretty close. Yeah. And then you could have the complicated one. It was pretty close. I was like, I go with the simple one that's pretty close. None of them was perfect. That was the dream, right?
Yeah, Don Newman, who makes the roller frames, he had a pin system as well, but he relied on the press support systems that shake. So that never panned out very well either. This is just showing a patent on the tri-lock system, which is expired now, so anybody that wants to make one can make one.
Yeah, go ahead. Feel free, everybody. Build your own tri-locks. Go crazy.
I don't know if you guys have any other comments
Well,
on stuff that I already went over.
I wanted to mention a little bit about, we're talking automatic printers here. In my early introduction with these guys is with dryers. I'm with Hicks Corporation, and our first product, a lot of people think of heat transfer machines for Hicks, but we were supplying conveyor dryers for precision and for advance.
No, don't give them this information.
yeah,
We got to have a next session next time on dryers. Come on.
Oh, okay. But whenever they need a dryer, I went out with TAS quite a bit, which stood for Tooling Automation Specialist, is what TAS was, and that's kind of what we did.
What was it? I never knew this. What did it stand for?
Tooling Automation Specialist.
Tool and Automation Specialist.
That's what TAS stands for. And then Hicks was Hicks Automation, and we would just do little projects for David Jaffa if he needed some. We did the Sidewinder for them at one time. If they needed components, it was just, I think everybody was just grouping together. Same thing with Riley Hopkins when Riley had that first press, and I see Charlie sitting out in the audience. Charlie would come in and help us with bridge the gap between Hopkins and Hicks. We all kind of built little widgets for each other. So I think it's interesting.
Let's see if we have any questions. Any history buffs out here want to know anything? Any questions? Any comments? So again, if you just came in, part of this is to start this discussion, to start to document some of this, because really it's lost. If you weren't here earlier, I mentioned that I was trying to do an article about some of the old machines. I could not even find a photo of a precision oval, and they're still in operation. So like the history really getting lost. Everything's not on the internet until we put it there. So questions? Comments?
One thing that we could touch on is the future from where we're at right now.
No, that's another topic.
That's another topic.
Plus, you have to give away your secrets.
All
and
right.
You have to kill everyone in the audience. This is not a good plan, I don't think. All right.
I think the biggest lesson is that a lot of things that are rediscovered by younger people think that that's the first time it's happened, and there's plenty of evidence that a lot of, not all of the things that you're seeing out there has been done before. It's just packaged in a different package, so you might not get every feature you want in one machine. You'll have to pick the things that are most important to you. So as you walk the show and if you're looking for a machine, that's really what I think makes a sale, is if it fits your shop. I know when you were talking about the screen frames and being able to throw them in and the machine automatically aligns them, if you were a company that had an inventory of jobs that you do and you repeat run those throughout the year, that's a pretty good system to have if that's the type of jobs that you work with.
It is funny how it evolved, though, of what features were important. Like, you definitely had to have one where you could clean the back of screens, and I guess now you need one so that somebody can be looking at their phone while they're operating the machine. Things change.
And we couldn't wait for trade shows to pick the brains of guys like Charlie Tobley. Charlie taught me early in the 80s, sitting out there, and you just start bringing it in like a sponge. Rick, I'd come by the advanced booth. I'd ask him about four-color process. I didn't know what four-color process was. Rick would tell me about line count. Learned it all at these shows. And, of course, it was before Google. So this guy was Google. Tom was Google. Our phones were constantly ringing off the hook, but now but be careful with what you read on the internet too, right? that's I'm seeing that.
All right, geezer, that's enough. All right, thank you again. How about a hand for Rick and Jameson?
Thank you.
Tom.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.